Welcome to Sherlock Mysteries, where every story is a new mystery waiting to be solved. Grab a coffee, stay interested, and experience the thrill with other mystery fans. Let's get started. Hercule Poirot and the Mystery of the Whispering Isle, Chapter 1. An Invitation to Mystery. The sea lay restless beneath the churning gray sky, its waves crashing furiously against the jagged cliffs of Whispering Isle. The storm had not yet arrived, but its presence loomed on the horizon, thick clouds gathering like an ominous promise against this backdrop. The ferry boat, its hull slick with salt spray, shuddered as it docked at the small jetty. A line of passengers disembarked, their coats flapping in the cold wind, faces turned downward against the spray among the P, unaffected by the tumult of the wind, descended with remarkable precision his bags. A single compact suitcase was carried ashore by a surly boatman who barely acknowledged him. "Mare M," said the man with a polite nod. He then stepped briskly onto the narrow stone path leading up to the manor. This was Hercule Poirot, called detective, and master of psychological insight. Though today he was simply a guest, his arrival at Whispering Isle had been prompted by a curious letter, one signed by S. Felix Harcourt himself. The letter had offered no explanation, only an invitation to come to Whispering Isle this weekend. "It is a matter of utmost importance." As Poirot climbed the winding path, he cast his gaze across the dark and foreboding cliffs protruded into the sea like the teeth of a gigantic beast. Beyond them, Hercule Poirot sat precariously on the edge, its tall windows glimmering dimly in the failing light. The house was modern yet frigid, an imposing edifice of stone and glass, the kind of place where secrets could thrive. At the top of the hill, a figure awaited him. Lady Genevieve Harcourt, Felix's young and beautiful second wife, stood outside the door of the home, her silk scarf flowing in the breeze. She was covered in a long blue coat, her auburn hair tucked neatly beneath a velvet hat. As Poirot approached, her lips curved into a practiced smile. "And Poirot," she replied kindly, extending a gloved hand. "Welcome to Whispering Island. I trust the journey was not too unpleasant." "Not at all," Madame Pooh responded, bowing slightly as he took her hand. "Although the sea, she's in a temper today, I hope." "It does not signify a storm of equal ferocity within the house, lady." Jeeves' smile faltered for the briefest moment, and Poirot did not miss the flicker of tension in her eyes. "Let us hope not," she said softly. "Do come in, you must be cold." She led him through the enormous entrance hall, where marble floors shone beneath a giant chandelier. The air inside was warmer, but still suffocating. A butler appeared silently to take Pooh's coat and suitcase, then disappeared as quickly as he had come. "You are the last to arrive." Lady Genevieve continued, her heels clicking softly against the floor. As she guided him through the house, "Everyone else is in the drawing room. Sir Felix will join us shortly. He's been occupied." She hesitated on the word, as if searching for a better one. Poirot made no comment, though he filed away her hesitation. In the recesses of his mind, they entered. Poirot stepped inside the guests. Four of them turned to stare. It was not hostility but curiosity, tinged perhaps with suspicion. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Lady Genevieve smoothly, "allow me to introduce Muir Hercule Poirot. He will be joining us for the weekend." There was a brief pause before a man in his mid-30s with unruly dark hair and a paint-smeared shirt rose from his seat. "The famous detective," he added with a hint of sarcasm. "I've heard about you." "I'm Bara Ara, Sir Felix's son." "A pleasure," Muir remarked. Poirot shaking the young man's hand, he noted the tight grip, but also the strain in Barona's jaw as the other guests introduced themselves. Camilla Sinclair, Felix's secretary, was a woman of excellent posture and calm efficiency, while her eyes betrayed a flare of something deeper disdain. Dr. Arthur Winslow, a family friend with a friendly face, but an appearance of worry, as if he carried an invisible burden. Lavinia March, a distant cousin and famous author, examined Poirot with a look as piercing as her writing. Captain Geoffrey Abbott, Felix's former naval officer turned business partner, had weathered more than simply storms at sea, as evidenced by his weathered visage. Poirot exchanged pleasantries, his keen eyes flitting from one face to the next. The atmosphere in the room was cordial on the surface, but beneath it tension simmered. The way Camilla Sinclair avoided Bernard's gaze, the way Lady Genevieve clutched her pearl when Captain Abbott spoke, all were subtle signs of unspoken grievances. As they settled into their seats, Lady Genevieve rang a small bell, and a maid appeared with trays of tea and biscuits. The clinking of cups and spoons provided Poirot admitted the letter was simple, only stating that my attendance was essential. Lenia mumbled, tapping her finger on the rim of her mug. Felix is not the type to extend invitations without a reason indeed. Pooh agreed, his gaze shifting to Lady Genevieve. Perhaps Felix will enlighten us when he joins the party. Lady Jeannie's hand trembled slightly as she placed her cup on the saucer. Yes, I'm sure he will. He's just attending to some last-minute business. The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but Poirot could not ignore the subtle undercurrents. The guests were not merely acquaintances. They were bound by complex ties of family business and possibly betrayal. After tea, Lady Genevieve excused herself to check on Felix, though her departure left an air of uncertainty. The guests dispersed, some heading to their rooms, others wandering the house, but the absence of Felix lingered like an unanswered question. Poirot, on the other hand, remained by the fireplace, his mind already piecing together the puzzle of this peculiar gathering. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a falling. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a falling. Restless spirit as Poirot gazed out the window watching the waves lash against the cliffs. He felt a sense of foreboding settle over him. There is a storm inside this house as well, he murmured to himself, and I fear it will break soon. Just then the clock on the mantel struck 8. The sound echoed through the room like a warning bell. Poirot stirred slightly, his gaze shifting toward the empty doorway through which Lady Genevieve had departed. His instincts warned him that the absence of Felix was more than just a matter of lateness. As the storm battered the island and the wind howled, Poirot could feel the first gusts of a far more dangerous tempest brewing within these walls. With a final glance at the fire, he straightened his posture and smoothed the front of his jacket. It is time, he murmured, to uncover. Pooh climbed the grand staircase, his footsteps soft against the carpet as he made his way to his room, where he carefully unpacked his belongings and lay down, his mind still spinning with unanswered questions as the wind howled beyond the window. Sleep came slowly, but eventually, and with it the promise of new revelations in the morning. Morning arrived at Whispering Isle with a dark and oppressive sky, the light subdued as if the storm clouds were hesitant to lose their hold, the scent of salt and damp. Earth filled the air as the household slowly stirred awake, but it was not long before tranquility gave way to unease. It was Camilla Sinclair who first raised the alarm. Her footsteps echoed urgently through the corridor as she rushed down to the drawing room, her face pale and her hands trembling. Sir Felix, he's missing his room. It's empty. Lady Genevieve sat at the table, nearly spilled her cup of tea. The exquisite china rattled against the saucer as she laid it down, and rose, her countenance turning rapidly from perplexity to fear. Empty? What do you mean, Camilla? Where could he have gone? The window was open, Camilla said breathlessly, facing the water, and you must see it for yourself. Bernard Harcourt lounging in the corner with a cigarette balanced between his fingers raised, a cynical eyebrow, but said nothing. Poirot, who had been observing the morning dynamics, quietly set his cup aside and rose with measured grace. Perhaps a Mademoiselle, you would lead us there. A line of concerned guests, now fully alert, followed Camilla up the grand staircase. The corridor was silent except for the soft thud of their footsteps against the carpet as they reached Felix's bedroom. The door stood ajar, a chilled draft escaping into the hallway inside the room was deceptively. The bed had not been slept in, and a little reading lamp still threw a dull glow. Low. The enormous window, however, had wide-open curtains flowing in the breeze, framing the spectacular vista of the sea. Beyond, Lady Genevieve gasped and grasped the doorway for support. Felix wouldn't have left in the middle of the night. He despised the cold. This doesn't make sense. Nonetheless, Madame Poirot remarked, stepping forward, we must consider all possibilities. The open window is really peculiar. Cum pointed toward a small table beside the window. His walking stick, it's missing. That's... Unlike him, he always needed it. The group stood in silence until Captain Geoffrey Abbott broke the spell. We should search the cliffs. If the window was open, he could have. He hesitated, unwilling to finish the thought. Let us not assume the worst, just... Yet Pooh interjected, his voice calm but firm. We will search, of course. But first I wish to examine the room. Lady Genevieve stepped back, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, as Poirot moved methodically around the room, his eyes flickering over the details, noting each item with precision. The bed covers had not been disturbed, and on the knitstand sat a broken porcelain figurine, its pieces arranged haphazardly, as if someone had tried to clean up the mess in a hurry. He picked up one of the larger fragments and examined it closely. A recent break, I think, he said thoughtfully. Madame Aurore, did Felix frequently sleeps with the window open? Never, she responded, shaking her head. He was fussy about drafts and usually complained if the room wasn't exactly heated. Fascinating, Poirot whispered as he knelt by the window, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of the frame. There, caught in the latch, was a small piece of fabric silk, which he carefully removed and slipped into his pocket. What have you found? Asked Lavinia March, who had been attentively monitoring Poirot. A clue, perhaps? Poirot replied enigmatically, getting to his feet and leaned slightly out of the window to inspect the moist ground below. To his astonishment, there were no footprints visible on the soft earth under the window, an inconsistency that nagged him. The earth is damp from yesterday night's rain, he commented aloud. If Felix had climbed out or been forced out, there should be traces, but there are none. Captain Abbott frowned. Could he have fallen further out, closer to the cliffs? Perhaps, Pooh allowed. His expression showed he wasn't totally certain. A startling cry from outside shattered the stillness. Bernard Harcourt appeared at the doorway. Having returned after a quick venture toward the cliffs, Camilla found his walking stick. He announced grimly, near the edge of the cliff. Lady Genevieve gasped, her composure crumbling. No, he can't be. Pooh placed a steadying hand on her arm. We don't know anything for certain yet, madame. I will go to the cliffs myself. The group made there way outside, the wind biting against their faces near the edge of the cliff. Camilla Sinclair stood immobile, the walking stick laying at her feet. She pointed silently toward the jagged rocks below, where the sea raged with relentless fury. It's his, she murmured gently. I'm sure of it. Lady Genevieve cried quietly, and Bernard lit another cigarette. The flame flickering in the breeze, his face was set, his look icy and distant. He's gone, he said flatly. It was only a matter of time, Bernard. Lady Genevieve wailed. How can you say such a thing? Because it's the truth, Bernard responded bitterly. My father made enemies of everyone, including his family, so don't be surprised. Poirot regarded Bernard closely. And were you one of those enemies? Bernard puffed smoke, his eyes narrowing. If you think I threw him off the cliff, you're wasting your time. I think there is only more to discover, Pooh responded smoothly, turning to Camilla. Mademoiselle, may I see the walking stick? She handed it to him, and he studied it carefully. There was a slight smudge of dirt near the handle, but nothing odd, so he handed it back as the group began to disperse. Pooh lingered by the cliff's edge, his gaze fixed on the crashing waves below. The scent of perfume, faint but distinct, drifted past him, carried by the wind. It was the same scent he had noticed earlier in Felix's room. Returning to the house, Pooh once again examined the bedside table, picking up the fragments of the broken figurine and then turning his attention to a silk scarf that Lady Genevieve had been wearing the previous evening. The scarf was missing as Poirot accepted the sketchbook and flipped through the pages, pausing at several angry caricatures of Sir Felix, one in particular showing him falling off a cliff. He closed the book thoughtfully. He murmured, the threads of the puzzle are beginning to weave themselves. But the pattern is far from clear as the day wore on. Speculation among the guests varied. Some whispered of suicide, others of a tragic accident, but Poirot standing by the window and watching the storm clouds. Chapter 2: Clues on the Cliffs. The hunt began in earnest, just as the wind started whistling across the rocks like a warning from some ancient vindictive spirit. Captain Geoffrey Abbott led the way, his boots crunching against the rough surface and scanning the surroundings with practiced precision. Poirot followed closely with his sharp eyes, observing every detail, every indent in the earth, and every gust of wind carrying the scent of salt and mystery. Camilla Sinclair, Dr. Arthur Winslow, and Bernard Harcourt trailed behind their faces. Lady Genevo had stayed behind because she was too distraught to continue, while Lavinia March had taken it upon herself to document the search in her ever-present notebook. Captain Abbott suddenly pointed to a cluster of jagged rocks at the base of the lighthouse, and the group hurried down the uneven slope, their breath visible in the cold morning air as they reached the rocks. Pooh's gaze was drawn to a splash of dark cloth hooked on a rocky boulder. It was Sir Felix's overcoat, its lining shredded and damp from the sea spray. The sight of it sent a chill through Camilla Sinclair, who covered her lips with her hand. "His coat," she mumbled. "But where is he?" Poirot went down and carefully examined the coat. He removed a small crumpled receipt from one of the pockets and unfolded it with gentle fingertips. It was for an expensive transaction, a pearl necklace dated only 2 days earlier. Poirot mumbled and tucked the receipt into his pocket. "Captain." Abbott surveyed the surrounding rocks and roaring seas. "If he fell from the cliffs, his body may be anywhere by now," he muttered grimly. "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone non-committal. He straightened and gazed toward the lighthouse, its whitish walls discolored with the wear of years. "Let us speak with the lighthouse keeper. He might have seen something when they reached the lighthouse door." Captain Abbott tried the handle, but it refused to budge. "Locked," he muttered. "We can't get in." Poirot considered this for a moment, then noted, "Very well, we will return later." If needed, he cast a final glance toward the structure. As though storing the image in his mind, the group proceeded to the nearby cottage where the lighthouse keeper, Mr. Finley, greeted them with suspicion. The old man had a weathered face and a perpetual squint. He peered at the group. "Before reluctantly allowing folk coming around on a morning like today," he mumbled. "What do you want?" "We are seeking for S. Felix Harcourt." Poirot explained that he is missing, and we believe he may have come this way last night. Did you notice anything unusual? Mr. Finley stroked his chin thoughtfully. "I did notice someone walking toward the cliffs late last night," he acknowledged. "Couldn't see who. It was too dark and pouring buck. But they were moving rapidly, like they didn't want to be spotted, and you did not investigate." M. Poirot inquired. "Not my business," the elderly guy responded with a shrug. "People come and go as they like on this island. I don't ask questions." Dr. Winslow shifted uncomfortably. "It could have been Felix," he said quietly. "He's been under tremendous stress, his business dealings. There were complications. It wouldn't surprise me if he stopped abruptly, as though realizing he had said too much." "Suicide, you mean?" Bernard interjected, his voice cutting through the room. "Like a knife, that's what you're implying, isn't it, doctor, that my father jumped?" Dr. Winslow flushed. "I'm only saying it's a possibility. Felix was not a guy without issues." But Poirot stated carefully that a man burdened by such trouble should confide in someone. "Did Felix express his concerns with you, doctor?" "Not directly," Winslow responded, avoiding Pooh's look, "but I knew everyone was satisfied for the moment." Poirot thanked Mr. Finley and led the group back outside, where the wind continued to pummel the cliffs as they strolled. Lavinia March caught up with Poirot, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands. "I saw someone sneaking out of the manor last night," she confessed in a low voice. "I was by the window in the library when I noticed a figure slipping through the side door. I couldn't tell who it was, but they were headed toward the cliffs." Pooh's eyes narrowed significantly. "And why didn't you mention this before, mademoiselle?" "I wasn't sure it was important," Lavinia replied. though the tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. Back at the manor, the group reconvened in the drawing room where a fire crackled in the hearth. Lady JVV sat by the window, staring out at the sea with vacant eyes. She turned as they entered, her gaze briefly locking on Poirot before shifting to Bernard. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "His coat," Camilla said softly. "And a receipt for a pearl necklace." Lady JV's hand flew to her throat, but she said nothing. Pooh cleared his throat and turned to Camilla. "You have been quiet, mademoiselle. I believe that Sir Felix recently threatened to terminate you from your post. Is that correct?" Camilla's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked ready to deny it, but then she sighed and nodded yes. "He found out about a mistake I made with the company. Finances, a mistake that could have cost him a lot of money. I tried to fix it, but he said it was too late. He was planning to fire me after this weekend, but you stayed." Poirot saw why. "Because I wanted to explain myself," she responded, her voice shaking. "I wanted him to see that it wasn't betrayal, simply a mistake, but he wouldn't listen, which is unusual." Pooh mumbled thoughtfully before turning to Bernard, who was resting by the fireplace. Sketchbook in hand and Ymir. "What did you do last night?" Bernard smirked. "I went to bed early like a good kid." "Fascinating." Poirot responded, his attention lingering on the sketchbook. "May I see it?" Bernard hesitated, then handed it over with a shrug. Poirot glanced through the pages, stopping when he came across a sequence of pictures depicting Felix in different embarrassing scenarios, one of which showed him plunging off a cliff. Poirot stated dry, returning the sketchbook. "Don't read too much into it." As the room fell silent, Poirot moved to the window, his mind racing. The clues were scattered like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle waiting to be assembled. He had Lavinia's account of the figure sneaking out, Camilla's admission of her threatened dismissal, and the pearl necklace purchased as days before Felix disappeared. One must be cautious when dealing with lies, he thought, for they are like threads tugged on one, and the entire fabric unravels. Turning back to the gathering, Poirot smiled faintly. "The mystery begins to reveal itself, Nuspa. I believe we are closer to understanding what happened to Felix, but there is still more to explore, Masami. The truth, it appears, is hidden just beneath the surface." The heavy drapes in the drawing room shook slightly as the wind outside beat against the windows. The fire crackled, creating flickering shadows across the room, yet the warmth from the hearth did little to soothe the tension boiling within. Lady Genevieve sat stiffly in an armchair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Bernard hardcore leaned on the mantel, tapping his cigarette, pour ash into a small tray. Camilla Sinclair perched on the edge of a velvet sofa, her posture tense as if poised for flight. Lavinia March scrawled something in her notebook, her pen racing frantically over the page. Poirot, perched by the fire with his hands steepled, examined them all. It was a tableau of buried emotions, and he, the patient observer, waited for the gaps to grow. "Isn't it all quite convenient?" Bernard abruptly broke the silence, his words dripping with venom as he darted his look toward Lady Genevieve. "Father disappears, and who benefits the most?" Lady JV's face flushed and her knuckles whitened as she grabbed the arms of her chair. "How dare you, Bernard? Regardless of his flaws, I have loved your father and would never harm him." Bernard sneered. "Let's not pretend you married him for his money, and everyone here knows it now that he's conveniently vanished. You stand to inherit everything. How fortunate for you." Poirot interrupted, his voice calmly, "But hard allegations are harmful when they lack proof. Perhaps we might examine another option. Your connection with your father was not harmonious." Bernard scoffed and pushed off the mantle. "Of course we had our differences. He was a tyrant, controlling and manipulative. But do you really think I would go through the trouble of killing him? He wasn't worth the effort, yet your sketches suggest otherwise." Camilla Sinclair cut in, her voice cold. "All those drawings of your father in humiliating poses, some of them depicting his death. You've thought about it plenty." Bernard's eyes narrowed. "And what about you, Camilla? When your father found out you were skimming money from the company, he was going to fire you, wasn't he? Maybe you decided to strike first enough, lady." Genevieve shouted, standing abruptly, her voice quiver, but she held her chin high. "We are tearing each other apart, but none of this will bring Felix back. Miss Poirot, please help us." Poirot stood, his countenance unreadable. "Madame, I intend to. But first, I must get the complete picture." When the talk burned out, Lavinia March began scribbling in her notebook. Oblivious to the room's shifting mood, Poirot regarded her attentively. Later that night, long after the household had withdrawn to their chambers, Pooh crept silently down the dimly illuminated hallways of Harcourt. Manor's instincts were piqued by something, a ripple in the fabric of deceit that screamed further examination. The wind howled as he walked outside, the chill piercing through his coat. He stayed close to the shadows, following the trail that led to the cliffs. In the distance, he spotted a man going quickly toward the rocky edge, and he mumbled to himself, "Le curieux me guide." He quickened his pace, careful to keep his steps silent. As he drew closer, the figure stopped near the cliffs where the moonlight revealed a familiar face. "Lady J.V.V. Poirot," called softly. She spun around, her eyes wide with fear. Beside her stood Captain Geoffrey Abbott, his expression equally startled. Poirot went nearer, a small smile twisting his lips. "A secret rendezvous, is it not? I wonder what Felix would think." Genevieve's breath hitched, and she gripped Abbott's arm. "It's not what you think. We were just discussing, may we talking in the dead of night by the cliffs far from the comfort of the manor. It is very weird." "Madame, perhaps you might clarify the subject of this talk." Captain Abbott exhaled sharply. "You may as well tell him, Genevieve. He already knows too much." Genevieve nodded reluctantly, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Felix knew about us, about my previous relationship with Geoffrey. It ended before I married Felix, but he never forgave me for it. He held it over me, always reminding me that I was beholden to him. And now that Felix is gone, you are free." Pooh's tone was sympathetic but probing. "I didn't kill it," she cried. "I swear it. I may have despised the way he dominated me, but I never wished him dead." Buo watched her for a time before shifting his attention to Captain Abbott. "Were you here to discuss the past or perhaps the future, A.B.? Felix had threatened to expose me, to ruin my reputation and my business dealings, but I didn't kill him either. We met here tonight to discuss what we would do if he returned." "If he returned," Poirot repeated softly. "Then you believe he is still alive?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," GV whispered. Poirot slipped into his pocket and produced a little thing. "Tell me, Captain, is this yours?" He handed up a gold cufflink, its surface sparkling in the moonlight. Abbott's cheeks turned pale. "Where did you find that?" "Along the cliffs." Poirot answered. "About where we now stand." Abbott turned aside, but Genevieve grasped his arm again. "Geoffrey, please, if you know something I don't," he yelled, jerking away from her. "I dropped that cufflink days ago. Anyone might have discovered it." Poirot placed the cufflink back into his pocket, his countenance contemplative. "But there is more. Messiness in the fireplace in the drawing room. I discovered this when he showed a portion of a torn letter with the edges singed. The phrases 'the lighthouse' and 'a debt to be paid' were faintly discernible." Genevieve gasped, bringing her palm to her mouth. "Felix had debts, or even responsibilities of another kind," Poirot remarked. "But the meaning of this message is still unknown for now." The wind howled again, and Poirot motioned toward the manor. "Let us return inside where it is warm. The night air is not nice to people with sorrowful hearts on their journey back." Pooh's mind worked hard. The clues were beginning to form a pattern. But the final piece was still missing, the key that would open the truth. Patiently, he assured himself, the jigsaw will soon be complete. Chapter 3. The early dawn was cold and bleak, with the water still restless from the night's storm, but it wasn't the weather that chilled the inhabitants of Harcourt Manor. The discovery made shortly after daybreak created shockwaves. Rippling through the house, Camilla Sinclair came into the drawing room, her face as pale as milk and her breathing ragged. Miss Pooh gasped as they discovered Sir Felix's death. In the lighthouse cellar, the room fell silent as if the air itself had been taken out. Poirot sat down with his cup of tea, and Rose quickly gestured for her to lead the way behind him. Lady Genevieve grabbed the back of a chair, her knuckles white, while Bernard Harcourt shared a glance with Lavinia Marge, who hurriedly closed her notepad. Within minutes, they were at the lighthouse, its white tower standing stark against the cloudy sky. Captain Geoffrey Abbott and Dr. Arthur Winslow were already there, waiting at the base of the edifice. Abbott looked grim, and Winslow's hands trembled slightly. As he adjusted his spectacles, Abbott quietly opened the heavy entrance to the cellar. The air within was wet and smelled of salt and mildew. Sir Felix Harcourt lay crumpled behind a tangled pile of fishing nets as a lamp swung on a hook, casting a weak light on the scene. His overcoat was moist, and his head hung at an unusual position, revealing a large gash near his temple. Poirot approached cautiously, his eyes examining the body and surroundings. He murmured. He did not fall. He was struck. The blow came first. And Dr. Winslow hesitated, then knelt beside the body. His fingers probed gently around the wound. Yes, he confirmed reluctantly, the injury to the head was the cause of death, judging by the stiffness, as he's been dead since around midnight. Poirot nodded, his gaze falling on a nearby object partially hidden beneath the nets. He pulled it free and held it up for the others to see. A blood-stained handkerchief embroidered. Poirot mumbled as he looked at Lady Genevieve, who was reclining against the wall, her face ashen. Madame, please, you must return to the house. This scene is not for you. She nodded weakly and aloud. Bernard to escort her away. Once they were gone, Poirot crouched beside the body again, examining Felix's clothes. In the pocket he found the fragment of a torn letter, the same one he had partially recovered from the fireplace. It is complete, he murmured. The full message read, "Meet me at the lighthouse midnight. The debt must be paid." He straightened, his mind working quickly. Pooh looked at her for a time. "Perhaps, mademoiselle, you mentioned hearing Felix recite a poem earlier. Do you remember it?" She nodded, pulling out her notebook and flipping to a page where the lines had already been written down. "Yes, it was strange. I overheard him in the library muttering to himself just yesterday, and I wrote it down in my diary. The lines went something like this: the keeper waits where shadows dwell upon the shore. A tolling bell, the debt is paid when blood is spilled, and secrets buried shall. This poem is not only an idle recitation. It is a puzzle that speaks of betrayal and hidden truths. Do you believe he knew he was about to die?" Lavinia whispered. Perhaps. Poirot responded. Or perhaps he wanted to meet the one who held this obligation over him. Either way, it did not end as he expected. They returned to the manor, where Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room: Lady Genevieve, Bernard, Camilla Sinclair. Captain Abbott and Lavinia all sat in uncomfortable quiet, anticipating his next move. The storm outside had returned with increased vigor, the wind banging the windows. Poirot stood by the fire, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Let us evaluate what we know. Miami. Sir Felix did not fall by accident. He was enticed to the lighthouse, struck on the head, and left with the handkerchief, note, and forced door. Each indication leads to a planned act, so who did it?" Camilla demanded. Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience, Mel, we are close, but the final revelation requires one more piece of the puzzle." As he spoke, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. Poirot knew the truth was lurking in those shadows, waiting to be drawn into the light. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "Tomorrow the final thread will be pulled, and the entire tapestry will be revealed." The morning after Felix's death was discovered, the home seemed to throb with an almost tangible tension. Rain pattered on the windows. The distant sound of the breaking waves was a continual reminder of what had happened the night before her. Siu Pua sat in the drawing room, sipping a cup of coffee, his eyes half closed, reviewing the history in his thoughts. Mare Hastings would call it a classic conundrum of Elise, he mumbled to himself. When everyone claims to be everywhere, but no one is where they should be. He had spent much of the early morning poring over the different reports provided by the visitors. Bernard Harcourt claimed to have been sketching by the cliffs during the storm, while Lady Genevieve stated she had been in her bed. Too distraught by S. Felix's disappearance for leaving Camilla Sinclair, claimed she went to bed early due to tiredness, while Captain Abbot's alibi was as obscure as it was unconvincing, indicating that he had been strolling the grounds. Poirot tapped his fingers against the table. There's a thread of truth hidden among the lies, but I must draw gently lest it snap. He summoned Camilla Sinclair first. She entered the room, tentatively adjusting her clothing as she sat opposite him. Mademoiselle Poirot began, I have been told that Sir Felix intended to dismiss you from his employee. Would you care to elaborate on why? Camilla's eyes darted to the window, avoiding his gaze. It was a misunderstanding. There were discrepancies in the company accounts, and Sir Felix believed I had been embezzling money. But I swear to you, I wasn't. I made a mistake, yes. But I didn't steal from him, and yet Pooh said gently you did not correct this misunderstanding before his death. I tried to explain, but Sir Felix refused to listen, threatening to ruin my career. I had no alternative but to stay and hope I could convince him. Pooh leaned forward slightly. And did you convince him, or did you regard his death as the end of your problem? Camilla's face reddened. I did not kill him. Miss Poirot, I was in my room all night. You can ask the maid, she brought me tea before bed. Ah, but the maid only saw you early in the evening, not later, Pooh pointed out. And you see, mademoiselle, there are footprints leading from the lighthouse toward the servants' quarters. Someone walked that path in the mud last night. Could it have been you? She shook her head vehemently. No, I swear it wasn't me. Then we shall see, Pooh murmured, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Next he called for Lady Madame Poirot began gently. You've been under great strain, I know, but I must ask, did you truly remain in your room all night, or did you meet someone perhaps? Captain Abbott, as you did before. Genevieve's lips trembled, but she composed herself. I stayed in my room, she said firmly. I couldn't bear to see anyone after Felix disappeared. I was overwhelmed, and yet your fear of being implicated must weigh heavily on you. Poirot remarked softly, you had a motive. Madame, Sir Felix knew of your past affair and used it to control you. Were you not desperate to be rid of him? I didn't kill him, she shouted, tears overflowing in her eyes. I was terrified, certainly. But I would never have known about the blackmail letter. Poirot interrupted softly. JVV blinked. What letter? There is a hidden compartment in Felix's desk. Poirot explained where I found a letter threatening to expose a scandal. It is unsigned, but it speaks of a debt due and the danger of ruin, I believe. Sir Felix was being blackmailed. No, she whispered. I didn't know. Poirot regarded her face for a bit before nodding. Mary, madame, that will be all for now. Eventually he called Bernard Harcourt. The young guy entered with his typical air of defiance. Fell into the chair, as if the entire ordeal bore him. Miss Bernard, Poirot beginning. You claimed to be sketching by the cliffs during the storm. What exactly were you sketching? The waves. Bernard responded slowly. The storm at the cliffs was spectacular, and you expect me to believe you were outside during a storm to capture nature's drama? Poirot asked, arching an eyebrow. Believe what you want. Bernard replied with a shrug. I did not kill him. Poirot stood and walked toward the window, gazing out as he spoke. And yet you were angry with your father. You despised him. Not your sketches of him falling from the cliffs, which were not idle fantasies, but reflections of your deepest desires. Bernard stood abruptly. I didn't act on them, however. I couldn't have then. How do you explain the extremely thin track of mud flowing from the cliffs to the servants' quarters? Poirot inquired, turning to face him. I don't know, Bernard stammered. You do know, Poirot replied firmly, but whether you are the murderer or simply shielding someone remains to be seen. The young man scowled at him but said nothing more as Bernard left. Poirot sat back down, deep in concentration. The timeline had gaps, But the web of deception was becoming clearer. Each person had something to hide, and each alibi was related to another's lie. Ah, Pooh muttered, steepling his fingers. The Elise are like clockwork gears, ma'am. If I uncover the broken cog, the entire machine will fall, and the truth will be revealed. Chapter 4. The Final Thread. The next morning, crisp and clear, the storm had finally passed. Leaving the cliffs glistening in the sunlight inside Harcourt Manor, all Poirot stood once more in the drawing-room, his little form well composed, his eyes sharp and expectant. The household had gathered at his request. Lady Genevieve Bernard Harcourt, Camilla Sinclair, Captain Abbott, Dr. Winslow, and Lavinia March. The air was thick with suspense, as if everyone knew the moment of truth was approaching. Miami Pooh began, his voice calm but forceful. We have reached at the finale of our little story. Every one of you had secrets, motivations, and a lease that could suggest guilt, but only one of you committed the crime. Today we shall see how the threads of deception have woven a lethal tapestry. He began, pacing slowly, hands clasped behind his back. Let us first consider the scene at the lighthouse. Sir Felix was lured there under the pretense of a meeting orchestrated through a letter. This letter was recovered in fragments, but was later reconstructed, revealing its purpose to summon Felix to his death. He turned to Lady Genevieve, who sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Madame, you feared Felix would expose your previous affair with Captain Abbott, but Captain Poirot added, shifting his gaze, were implicated through the handkerchief embroidered with your initials. A handkerchief was purposefully put at the site to deceive us that you were not the one who struck the fatal blow. Captain Abbott applauded, relief flowing over his face, but Pooh's attention was already shifting to Bernard Harcourt. Miss Berna, you disliked your father and your sketches reflected deep-seated animosity, but you did not act on your rage. Instead, you communicated it via art, a safer outlet. Perna shifted awkwardly, avoiding his mother's gaze. Poirot halted, his gaze falling on Sinclair, who had been sitting tightly, her knuckles white as she grasped the armrest of her chair. Mademoiselle, he murmured quietly, the moment has come. Camilla's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. You have the motive. Sir Felix discovered your embezzlement, a betrayal that could have ruined your career and your life. He confronted you, threatened you, and you had the opportunity to arrange the meeting at the lighthouse, where he thought he would gain the upper hand, but instead you delivered the fatal blow. Camilla's breathing increased. I didn't intend to murder him, she muttered. It just happened. I wanted to explain myself, to ask him not to report me, but he laughed. He said I was finished, and no one would hire me again. I panicked. Oui, Poirot said sympathetically but firmly. In that moment of desperation, you struck him with whatever you could find, but your panic did not end there. You attempted to cover your tracks by forcing the lighthouse door to make it look like a break-in, planting Captain Abbott's handkerchief, and even staging the scene so that it appeared Sir Felix had been caught in an accident. But as meticulous as you were, you may have made mistakes. Camilla's gaze sank to the floor. The perfume, Poirot said, his voice soft but decisive. Your signature scent was faint but unmistakable in Sir Felix's room. And then there was the broken figurine, a gift Sir Felix had given you, one you despised and shattered in your anger, but you left the pieces behind, unaware they would become part of the evidence. Camilla wailed quietly, tears flowing down her cheeks. He left me with no choice, she murmured. He was going to destroy all I worked for. I didn't intend for it to happen, but it did. Poirot responded, and you must face justice. The room fell into a profound silence, interrupted only by Lady J.V.'s muted weeping. Bernard looked at Camilla with betrayal in his eyes, while Captain Abbott shook his head, evidently stunned by the change of events. Dr. Winslow cleared his throat, but Poirot raised his hand. There is nothing more to say, Doctor. The truth has been disclosed, and the authorities will arrive shortly. Camilla was led away quietly, her sobs fading as she disappeared down the corridor, Poirot returned to the window and looked out at the cliffs and the sea. Beyond, the storm had passed, leaving the scene serene, as if nature itself had released a sigh of relief. Just as Miami, Poirot's murmur may not undo the past, but it restores balance to the present, and in this balance, perhaps we can find peace. 2 days later, the visitors of Harcourt Manor began to depart. The tension that had once strangled the household lifted. Lady Genevieve went to the family's country estate, seeking to find solace away from the memories of the island. Bernard returned to London, however, his sketches had taken on a more dismal tone. Poirot stood on the jetty, his tiny luggage laying by his side. As the ship approached Lavinia March, the last to leave, approached him. "You solved the mystery, Miss Poirot. I'm wondering if you ever get tired of the UN concealing such darkness." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, mademoiselle, for where there is darkness there must also be light. The trick is in finding it." As the ferry drew away from the island, the cliffs of Whispering Isle receded into the distance, but the teachings of its secrets were carved in Pooh's memory. The sea, peaceful and infinite, stretched before him, a reminder that truth, like the tides, always finds its way back to shore. Thank you for tuning in to Sherlock Mysteries. If you enjoyed the intrigue and suspense, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell symbol to be updated on more interesting detective adventures. Your support keeps the stories coming and the mysteries alive.